your conversation, and we have somebody taking the time, and you'll have about 10 minutes for question and answers we've put aside for the audience. Thank you.
So I will use the microphone because it's difficult to project sometimes. Yeah, we're delighted to have Christopher with us today. I had 27 novels, but it's 28, and 6 works of non-fiction. But that was from the Wikipedia page, so it may not have been updated. But it's a lot of work. It's over 30 books over a period of 30 years. You're best known for the Vincent Calvino detective series, which is set right here in Thailand. Most of them are in Thailand. The first one I read was called Batea 24/7, and that was published in 2004, I believe. And I had been in Thailand since 2001, and I was just trying to think, because it's almost 30 years that the series has been, with us. The changes that have occurred over that 30-year period are quite staggering. If you think, obviously we didn't have the SkyTrain system, we didn't have, taxis didn't have a meter back then, you had to negotiate fares with taxis and whatnot. We didn't have the mobile phone. People used to eat in groups, Thais, they were very worried about doing things independently. Now that's not an issue. A beer was about 20 baht, I think, back in 92. You could stay in a bungalow for 1,000 baht a month on the beach somewhere, down south. So things have changed, and each, this is the 17th in the series, and each Calvino novel touches on a kind of social or political issue in the region. We've had human trafficking, drugs in the first, I think, Spirit House. Even technology was mentioned in The Big Weird, which was way back in 96. And that brings us on to the latest one, which deals with the issue of global warming. And it's set in the future. And it's written in the first person, which is interesting. The rest of the series have been in the third person, but this time we get up closer, more personal with the narrator, with the protagonist. So it's been a wonderfully long career for Calvino. He's seen all sorts of changes in the region, and I know you will continue writing, Christopher. Your non-fiction work, such as Rooms, was a great success for me personally. It was a great book. So I like the direction you're going in, and we're all a little bit emotional to say goodbye to Vinny, because he's been with us so long. You see, back when we first came to Thailand, there was no kind of internet forums and magazines telling us about the different places where to go. What to expect from the culture here. We had Calvino. We would read the early crime series along with Killing Smile and the Smile trilogy, and they would be an education for us to learn about the culture in Southeast Asia. So it's very important to have these books. We had guidebooks, and we had Vincent Calvino, to steer us through these muddy waters in Bangkok. So it's marvellous to be here, and I look forward to hearing more about the latest in the series, latest and last in the series.
Thank you very much, James. And James is a very distinguished crime novelist himself. So I would urge you to look at his oeuvre about Joe Dylan, and you'll find a very dark, dystopic, noir vision of the city, and it's well worth, all the books in that series are brilliantly written.
Thank you.
Thank you as well for the introduction, both of you, for making me feel welcome, and thank you for coming today. It is a bit of a historical day in the sense that more than just a book launch, it's to say goodbye to a series that's been very dear to me for 30 years. And I think for a lot of people, the Calvino series has been a little bit of a rite of passage. You know, we live in our memories, and we live in the present, and we think about the future. And what Calvino hopefully does is stimulate all of those time zones that all of us experience. I mean, when I first arrived in Bangkok at the end of 1988, it was a very different city. 30 years ago, when I took this photograph, this is Sukhumvit and Asok intersection. Those of you, the old timers in the room, will remember that seafood restaurant there on the corner. Now there's something called Exchange Tower on that particular spot. And of course, the BTS goes over where that is. But the reason I show this slide is to give you an idea of where Calvino originated, where he was born. This is what the city looked like when I first conceived of this idea in 1990, 30 years ago. This was the original haunts that Calvino would have gone through in searching for basically missing people. The next shot, I think it's time to acknowledge some of my mentors. I think every writer has at least one or two mentors who are people who provided guidance and counsel, and most of all provided the belief that you had some talent that should be developed, that you should be nurtured, you should be encouraged. I was very fortunate to have two such people in my life. One was Sterling Celephant, who won an Oscar for In the Heat of the Night with Sidney Poitier and Rod Steiger in 1967. And he was a dear friend. And he helped me in many ways, particularly with structure in film business. And then the other mentor was Barney Rossett, the legendary, iconic publisher of Grove Press. And Barney was a very early admirer of the Calvino books. He came to Thailand. We met many times. Odd, my wife, and I were guests of Barney and his wife Astrid in New York a number of times. I attended with Barney the National Book Award, where he was given a lifetime award, helped Barney with his speech. So I was able to give back a bit to a mentor who had given a lot to me over the years. And that's Barney and I at the Old Dutch in 1994 on Soy 23.
It's no longer there.
It's gone. Well, this is the guy who in 1990 looked like that. So a little bit surprised, a little bit in front of a plate with the rice left, but the food basically gone. And at that point in 1990, if you'd asked me, in 30 years more, you're going to be sitting on a platform in front of an audience and explaining how you came to write 17 books over 30 years about a private eye, I would have thought you had been taking some kind of special drug. Because I don't think any writer ever imagines writing that first book, what lies ahead? What is that pathway going to be? Where will it go? And those of you who know the series have an idea of where that path led, and it's led to the final book, which I will soon be talking about. Part of the series is about Calvino as a cultural detective. Now, one of the things that I think many people in this room, particularly the expats, understand what it is when you go from one culture, your home culture, to another culture. You have a different language, a different history, a different religion, a different architecture, a sense of beauty, a sense of norms and values, all of which have to be learned. And you either adapt to that or you go back home. So what you need is a good broom to sweep out some of the cultural cobwebs that you've brought with you and to look at things afresh. The first thing you do is you start to notice things that are done differently in that culture. And one of the things you notice is that there are vendors selling all kinds of things. And again, before the Tesco's and the other supermarkets became prevalent, a lot of the things that you would buy from vendors on the street. Particularly like this. This is the old racetrack. And I think, again, expats have one thing in common with gamblers. They're risk takers. They're looking to do things that are unpredictable. They're willing to put a bet on a horse. I've written a couple of books about gambling, one called Gambling on Magic, and gambling at this particular racetrack is the opening gambit of one of the Calvinos called 0 Hour in Phnom Penh. So that gamble paid off, as the book is in about 13 languages. Now, one of the things that I think is important is to mark when did that old time really come to an end? When do things start to change noticeably? It's like most things, the future is here around us, except we don't see it now, we see it later. This was the future. This is the 5th of December, 1999. And that pretty much changed everything. And the reason it changed everything is suddenly accessibility. It was fast and cheap. You could go to many different places in one day. Before that, you were limited by negotiating with a taxi, taking a motorcycle, taxi, walking, or a bus. Now suddenly you were in a mass transit system that was starting to take you into other parts of the cities which you didn't really go to. So where I would go to those on foot and by motorbike, now a lot of people could go to those places. They were no longer the same mystery. What transportation systems, new ones do, is they expand the cone of light so that things that were a mystery now become obvious and now become available to just about everyone. So the rapid system, train system here, the MRT, how many of you took the MRT here today? Okay. Now that's absolutely remarkable if you think about it. It's going to open up this area in a way that was not open before. The relationship that people have with other people will change. What you see now in the area is just about to change forever. So when you go out, look around, look at the shops, look at where things are, remember that, because in 10 years, it's not going to look like this. It's going to look, you're going to think more like that first photograph I showed you of Sukhumvit Road in 1989. The city has absolutely transformed itself in terms of the high-rises. We've all seen this. This is part of the change that's brought about. You have a new transportation system. The city itself has a new look. You have high-rises. Suddenly you have very tall condominium buildings. You have shopping malls all throughout the city that weren't there before. You have the rise of a middle class. You have the rise of people with enough money now to put a down payment on a car and drive it in the city to actually increase the traffic jams even worse. But now we suddenly find a new part of Bangkok, which enters the Calvino novels, which is the middle class. Part of the series has been trying to document the growth of that middle class, what it has meant socially and economically and politically for the people who live here, and also the same thing I've tried to do in Phnom Penh, in Ho Chi Minh City, and in Yangon, in Myanmar, trying to capture those moments of dramatic social and economic change and to find a way to see how people are adapting to those changes. Of course, the change is not uneven. We see the contradictions. We see the old soy dogs sleeping on the step of the new banks. And so what we look for is not just the new, but the continuity with the old. We still have some street vendors, but we see they're vanishing like the soy dogs. The city is transforming the way it looks, the way it smells, the way it feels, the way it appears to others who are walking on the street. A fan of mine in Hawaii sent me, he was moving house and he was moving his library, and so he had stacked up the books of mine he'd bought over the years. And what I'm looking at and what I'm showing you is not anything other than a kind of a chronicle. The way I've spent the last 30 years of my life is thinking about, reflecting, and trying to come up with a multiple point of view of the diverse number of people that I know who live in this city, and to make them real enough that people will engage with them for the length of a book. Now we're in the future. Now we're in 2020. And we see that the changes that are ahead of us are changes that aren't as easily under our control. We're dealing with a major climate crises around the world, and one of those crises is certainly happening in Thailand. And I think that the changing environment is one that's important, and it's important enough for me to have written the last book about the impact of climate change and what that means, say, in the deep future. Decades from now, what will the result of it be? We've seen how in 1989 Sukhumvit looked. We've seen how the new buildings look today. The question is, what will things look ahead? What is the future? So that last of the Calvino books, I send Vinnie Calvino into the future in a missing person case, trying to find a missing person in a city that has remnants of our Bangkok, but in many ways has changed. The populations have changed, the way they dress, where they go, the governing system has changed, and the climate itself. So the question is having finished Dance Me to the End of Time, what is the next thing that I'm planning to do? Well, part of it is a dedication to the subject of climate change and trying to understand more fully what the impact is in Thailand. We know, certainly you can see from the slide, the air quality and the air pollution is something that's a major problem. And I see Richard Burrows is here in the audience, and he has tweeted about this multiple times. There are a lot of people who are very concerned about the quality of air, the quality of water, the availability of water in terms of droughts, too much water in terms of floods, biodiversity. These are some of the major issues that we have ahead of us. And the question is how can I, as a novelist, make a difference? What can I do to help increase this awareness of what is happening and to try to come up with some positive solutions? And what I've done is founded a film festival, Changing Climate, Changing Lives Film Festival 2020. The festival will be held at BACC November 21st, 22nd this year. We're inviting, in particular, young Thai filmmakers and the general public as well to make short films, 10-minute films, to show us what is the impact of climate change in your community and what kinds of actions are you taking, your family's taking, to mitigate or adapt to these kinds of changes? Because we think that there's a lot of local wisdom, knowledge, and experience that needs to be shared. Because if some of the worst things happen with climate change, it is that local wisdom that we're going to need to know about, we're going to need to share. And so this film festival, hopefully, will be a contribution to that dialogue and to that discussion. So I'm moving then from the written word, which to me is very important, I've been doing this for 30 years, to the visualization. So I'm taking it that next step. So the next step in the future is looking at Thailand from a different point of view. Looking at some of these major problems, particularly outside of Bangkok, where you have agricultural areas which are already suffering from shortage of water. There's a drought issue in many places. And this is having a significant impact on lives of ordinary Thai people who can't repay their loans. We all know the problem with fires. It's not so much wildfires in Thailand, but man-made fires that's causing a lot of problems. But it's not just the fires, it's going to be extreme weather, especially extreme heat. Everyone knows and feels how much hotter it's been the last couple of years, and it's going to get hotter yet. Those of you who've been here a long time will remember the floods in 2011 and how the areas outside of Bangkok were basically underwater for a very long time. That you saw on the BBC boats going through houses, in through people's sitting rooms and kitchens. So heavy rainstorms are probably going to be a companion in our future. We're going to find that this is something that happens more frequently. This is a particular shot that influenced a couple of scenes in the new book, Dance Me to the End of Time. Just a panoramic shot of what it means when the water does rise, when you can't stop that from happening, and you see a landscape which is utterly transformed. It's not livable at that level. Where do these people go? Where do they get their food? Where do they get their fresh water to drink? How do they dispose of their trash, their waste? So Dance Me to the End of Time is an end to a series, but it's the beginning of something I think that's important. I hope that I'm going to be able to encourage people to think about climate change in a new way, not so much the scientific way, but in the personal way, through the personal storytelling that's to come. This is a portrait by Peter Kashorst, a Dutch painter from Amsterdam, who did this particular portrait in 2015. So that is the old Christopher Moore. That's the one who belongs to the past. And I'll leave you, let's see, how are we doing on time? Actually, we're okay. One of the other parts of the series that I'm quite proud about is that I think it's encouraged other people to be creative. It's created artists. You saw the painting by Peter Kashorst. There's an artist named Chris Coles who's done a whole series of paintings about the Noah as a result. There have been a band in Phnom Penh, Cambodia called Chrome, which has taken up the Noah banner, so that it's been able to create a little bit of a momentum. And part of it is being able to have a chance to meet other artists. And one of the people is an artist in America, Edward Casagrande, who designed the cover for Dance Me to the End of Time. What Edward did was create an art exhibition around the creation of this cover, a dialogue between a writer and a painter over a vision of mythological epic proportions, of trying to design a cover that can capture a mystery, an investigation into a private person's life in the future after climate change has hit. And this is part of the studies that that artist, Edward Casagrande, made. He's done 17 different prints, and he's labeled each of these as part of his artistic impression of what it was at that moment of time to be working on this project in collaboration. Now think about it. I'm collaborating with an artist who's 10,000 miles away in the United States, someone I've never met. The only reason this collaboration can possibly work is because of an internet connection. I'm able to send him words, ideas. I'm able to respond to his words and ideas and his visualizations. And so this process is captured in a number of these prints that he's made. And here it's capturing the mechanical, the natural, the predator, the bloodsucker, our position on the balcony looking out at the world of shapes. And for him, he found there was an uneasy surrender, an ominous power, a decaying dream in the book. So one of his last, number 13, is, again, I create this notion of sinkholes in Bangkok, where the ground gives way, and that it's kind of an ominous dumping ground for the things that are broken from the old culture, the old way. And he sent this as kind of a message in a bottle of, help me, give me more clues. I'm getting lost in the maze of images that we're creating together. So Calvino City is looking like a collage. Christopher is still giving up clues about smoke and veils. Sinkholes are swallowing Bangkok. Basically, give me more. This is a film festival that I founded that's coming up. Changing Climate, Changing Lives. We're going to be premiering the promo video of this festival tomorrow night at 6:30. We're going to have a lot of people there. I hope that you'll be able to come. I think it's going to be a very special evening. We're going to have a panel of people talking about why this festival is at the right moment of time in Thailand and what we plan to do. And that's where we're going to be. And so what I'm going to do is, I hope that you will enjoy the new book. You'll enjoy one writer's look at what is perceived to be the future. The future is, of course, unknown. It's unknown to me, it's unknown to anyone. And there are many possibilities of outcomes. I'm writing about one of those outcomes, and I'm hoping that in 2050, the people who will be around, if there are people around, will say, he got part of it right, but not all of it. He understood some of the elements, but missed these. But the beautiful thing is in 2050, there will still be people around to ask those kind of questions and to read these books. Thank you for coming.
It was interesting that you mentioned visual arts there, because I think the first place we met properly was at the old Bed Supper Club. Does anyone remember on Soy 11? It was like a space capsule. And Chris Coles, the surrealist painter, was doing a show there in December 2011. And we were sitting having dinner, and there was a live dance performance. And one of the dancers was thrown across the floor, and the chap who was supposed to be catching her completely missed, and she just hit the floor. And I remember, I remember thinking my literary career was kind of like that at the time, you know, it was some false starts. But we put on some events, some reading events, down at the old Check-In 99 on Sukhumvit Road. And there was a movement of sorts with art, a little bit of film, poetry, literature. So that was good times. And I do wonder, I want to talk about the private detective, because I've written detective novels as well. And I do wonder if the kind of legwork that a detective does, if you think of the traditional gumshoe model, you know, outside a hotel waiting for someone to come and trailing them, you know, we don't need to do any of that anymore, do we? We have security cameras, we have these devices in our pockets, mobile phones that detail everywhere we go, who we talk to, what we like, you know, where we might be going. So has the detective's job become too easy? Has the detective become, you know, is he still needed in society?
That's a good question, and I think it's still being worked out. You know, part of the reason detectives had an important role, in a lot of cases, it could be an insurance fraud case, often they work for law firms trying to find people who've skipped out on their debts or their alimony or whatever, or they're trying to find a lost daughter or son, something like that. Those kind of cases are still going to come around, but you're absolutely right. The technological tools of finding people have fundamentally shifted. I mean, we all in this room, I'm just looking around, we come from an analog age. We come from an age of face-to-face discussions. When we want to find out information, we go and we talk to someone. That's what we did 30 years ago. We don't talk to people in that way now. We communicate in a different way. We may message that person, and we would expect a return message almost immediately. So there is a kind of an immediacy in the communication system. There is the lack of the face-to-face meeting, and to me that's very important, because a detective learns a lot of information by just the body posture, by what the person is wearing, whether they're sweating, whether they're nervous, whether they've blushed, whether there's some kind of a tell. And that's part of what a cultural detective does as well, because those tells are cultural as well as anything else. You learn to read people of a culture in terms of how they will give away, I'm lying. And that, of course, is very important and useful information if you're in the midst of an investigation, because you're seeking truth. And someone who lies to you is trying to prevent you from finding that. So, yes, things have changed. We will need detectives in the future, but these detectives are going to have to be equipped to deal with the digital world, because to find people now, you don't chase them down the street, you chase them down the digital rabbit hole. You look for them in different places. Maybe you find them in social media, on Twitter or on Facebook, or someone who knows them. So the way you look and where you look has changed.
Yeah, interesting. We will still need that connection, but it's a totally different operation now. I wanted to talk quickly about the shift from third person to first in the last novel, and how you found using that technique whilst in the process of writing. Was it difficult to switch? I switched in my series to first person and I found it kind of liberating. I found it easier, to be fair.
I mean, I had written novels outside of the series in the first person before, so I was familiar with that particular way of presenting a story and a character. I think what I wanted to do is, for the last one, since it's set in the future, is I wanted to go interior psychologically into Vincent Calvino in a way that a third-person narration doesn't allow you. There's a bit of a barrier always in the third person, where with the first person, that is the person, that is the unvarnished, real person who is on the page. And those kind of personal stories, I think, are ones that people find more sticky, more interesting, more revealing. So I've tried to reveal aspects of Calvino as a character that can only be revealed in the first person.
And I don't think we've ever spoken about this before, but it interests me about the kind of political correctness of having a white male detective in the Far East, in Southeast Asia. It seemed to me that it was kind of acceptable to have that kind of protagonist through the 90s and the noughties, even into the 10s. But since, with the Me Too movement, it seems less and less palatable to have this kind of character leading a series, whether it be, a television or a novel series. Is that something you've taken into consideration when retiring Vinny?
It's a good point, and I think a lot of people are talking about there's this notion of cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
In other words, I understand where that is coming from, but I also understand that we live in a place which is very diverse. Bangkok in particular is an extremely diverse population of people. And I don't think that that's particularly unusual. I think a lot of places have changed. London, from when I was a student, is a very different place now than it was in the 1970s. I was talking to a Canadian last night, talking about Ottawa, and she said, you've been away now, 32 years, I get back occasionally. She said, when I was growing up in Ottawa, you go down the street, everyone was a Caucasian. She said, you go today, and that's no longer the case. It's a very diverse place. And so we learn to deal with diversity, and part of what this series is about is learning to deal with diversity.
Yeah.
And not to be distracted by the fact that ethnicity and appearance should not be what you need to be admitted to go through that door.
And it's not as exotic as it once was, back in Vinny's early days, in the late 90s, and there weren't as many, it was far less diverse. There wasn't as many expats here, and the expats that were here were normally, male, white, middle-aged guys. But now you have you have filmmakers here, you have students, international students, you have a lot of people in the tech business, startup companies. So it's less. There's less to explore in a way. The culture's already been realised to a certain degree by the people here. So there's less requirement for that kind of document, that social document to help one discover a place. And we should talk about film. I know the series. I think Spirit House was optioned, and then the series has been optioned. The entire series, or just one episode? First of all, it was a feature film for Spirit House. They came over from the States. They had a scout around. They went back, and as happens in Hollywood, nothing happens for about 10 years. But then there was another approach, I think, more recently. So it's a difficult one to answer, but if it were to go ahead, would you have a hand in the script writing, or would you just say to whoever was writing the script, "Here's the books, do your best and hope for the best"? Would you like to have a hand, seeing as you're now working with film as well with the festival?
Yeah, the books are still under option with Film Nation, which is a major independent distributor and producer of films in Los Angeles and New York. And they are working hard. They think maybe this year they'll be able to put the deal together. They have a script by Chase Palmer, who's a well-known Hollywood scriptwriter, called Spirit House.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's a Hollywood movie. So whether it would be better on Netflix as opposed to the silver screen, I'm not sure. But at the moment, it's being pitched as a movie. They've got the financing, they've got the script. They're talking with a couple of directors and actors, and we'll see where it goes from there. But as James hinted, these film deals are, first, they're hard to get, and secondly, getting a film made is very, very difficult for a whole variety of reasons. Everything has to line up. You have to be able to shoot the free throw and sink it 10 times in a row. So I think we're probably running out of time, and
should we open up for any questions, or have we got time for the audience? Okay. What are you working on now?
What I'm working on now is the film festival, and as that progresses in the next couple of months, I will be starting a new book. What that book is, I'll keep that a secret at the moment.
It's a female detective in Bangkok.
That the crime novels are
a more male thing, or do you think women enjoy them just as much?
I think women enjoy them more.
I think that women love crime novels, so long as there is a female interest, and that the female is a strong woman who actually adds to the story as opposed to an ornament in the story.
Exactly.
And I've tried to do that in the Calvino novels to make certain that Calvino is, when he's working a case, he's not just working a case with other guys and the women are the ones who serve coffee. No, that's not the Calvino novel system.
Okay, well, let's give Christopher a big hand of applause. And we wish him luck for the film festival, and also look forward to the novel that's launched today. It will be on sale outside, and you'll be there for the signing.
Yes, I will.
And Christopher also has another activity about how to create the detective.
Yes, if you have time, I'm doing a workshop on creating memorable fictional characters. So if you've ever wondered what that process is, I want to come and we're gonna workshop it together. So it's not gonna be just me talking. It's gonna be you working as well.
It's just going to be